Wholeness and welcome. This is Josh Dippold from Integrating Presence, and today's live event is called Being in and of Nature. And the description I have is weather and insight timer systems permitting, I'll speak to the challenges and benefits of practicing meditation in nature, under a tree, or just simply being outdoors, maybe some practice too. Okay, so I was lucky enough to arrive here today early enough to do my morning practice in nature. It was interesting getting here. Actually, when I arrived here, there was a huge cloud of dust from earth movers working in the area right around here. Not too far away is the Missouri River, and this is actually a park. It looks more like wilderness, but it's kind of more of a park. And so then I was so embroiled in the energy of gotta get things done, gotta do stuff at all costs, that I made 3 trips back to my car. 2 trips actually. I forgot my meditation cushion and blanket, and then I also forgot my cell phone because I need that for the hotspot. So I made 3rd time's a charm here. But anyway, let's just take 3 breaths and arrive in the space that we're in right now. So if you're comfortable, close your eyes and invite your full attention to follow every moment of the in-breath and out-breath, just for 3 breaths, starting whenever you'd like. Okay, when you're ready, you can open your eyes, bring yourself back to the space you're in. And I don't know if you can hear on the microphone, but there's birds, which are lovely, chirping. You can also hear the roar of the interstate. I don't know if it picks up on the mic, and the beeping of the land movers. But besides that, it's fairly peaceful here. And for anybody that hasn't joined me before in my style, I tend to do this not linearly, so some people might find it confusing not to have a linear way of approaching material and presentations. I go more in a spiral, so sometimes I'll come back to a topic, sometimes I'll go out on tangents, and also I'll kind of chunk topics in little chunks and go through them and then go to another one. So the biggest thing I notice about practicing in nature is my nervous system just tends to relax and unwind a lot easier. So when we're in nature, or when I'm in nature, I guess I can't speak for anybody else, it's important that you feel safety, because there are some areas, wilderness especially, if there's wild animals or, shady characters, things like that, where you don't feel safe. And some people, they have to be with somebody out in the wilderness to feel safe, or even outside, and that's totally okay. So that's the first thing. If you don't feel completely safe, well then it's going to have to be a practice of investigation of why that is, how that is. But for me, once I feel safety out here, then I can attune to nature. The nervous system just feels safe and natural, and so there's no kind of threat, wondering what other people are doing, everybody else kind of crying out for pain, wanting attention, mostly unconsciously. I'll get into some more of this later. I just wanted to read a really quick little thing from the suttas. It's from the Anguttara Nikaya, Book of the Fours, 4.262, a wilderness dweller. And so this is just 2 paragraphs, and you can kind of see what this is talking about. Endowed with any of 4 qualities, a monk isn't fit to stay in isolated forest and wilderness dwellings. Which 4? He's endowed with thoughts of sensuality, with thoughts of ill will, with thoughts of harmfulness, and he is a person of weak discernment, dull, a drooling idiot. Endowed with any of these 4 qualities, a monk isn't fit to stay in isolated forest and wilderness dwellings. Endowed with 4 qualities, a monk is fit to stay in isolated forest and wilderness dwellings. Which 4? He is endowed with thoughts of renunciation, with thoughts of non-ill will, with thoughts of harmlessness, and he is a discerning person, not dull, not a drooling idiot. Endowed with these 4 qualities, a monk is fit to stay in isolated forests and wilderness dwellings. So yes, if you're thinking about where to get the next ice cream cone, right, you're probably not going to be too concerned with being in the woods, because you want to get out of there and get, some sensual things done. But there's a lot of sensuality in the body in practice too. It doesn't mean that. Thoughts of ill will. Yes, if we have thoughts of ill will, well then, that's when we can get in trouble by animals and stuff. But when we have thoughts of non-ill will, then other creatures perceive us not as a threat, and there's really not as much to worry about. Weak discernment. So having strong discernment. Yeah, if you're really confused out in the woods and stuff, then yes, that can just lead to more unsafety, feelings of danger and threat. So being discerning of the environment and what potential upsides and downsides there may be, easy for me to say. And then there's this, I was just going to mention real briefly this other one, and I'll link it in the show notes, this other sutta about the wilderness. It says, mendicants, when a mendicant has 5 qualities, they're ready to frequent remote lodgings in the wilderness and forest. What 5? And I'll just name these as being ethical. Code of conduct, it's 1. They're learned in remembering what they've learned. It's good for survival skills, I guess. They live with energy roused up, so energy. 4 absorption states, those are the meditative states that I was talking about, that the jhanas. So the first one's kind of like joy, the second one's like rapture. Some people experience like having a low-level orgasm that keeps going on for a really long time. And then the next one is bliss, kind of a blissful state, where it's more of in the mind. And then the 4th one is peace. That's a topic for another time. And let's see, the other quality here is a freedom of heart and freedom by wisdom in this very life, an undefiled freedom of heart and freedom of wisdom. So anyway, back to now our regular world here. I don't know if it's still being hyped a lot in the media. A little while ago, we were talking about metaverse, right? And so I was just wondering if there's a bunch of people on the metaverse and in a virtual reality, then I think nature will be kind of less crowded. Today it's fairly not crowded here. There's a few trails here, but the weather's a little bit chilly. So that has good sides and downsides, I guess. I think I'm just going to leave that at that. But one of the first things we kind of obviously notice in nature is there's no sharp angles in buildings, no steel and glass. There's really no 90-degree angles in nature. There's roundness, unless you include some minerals like maybe fluorite has some 90-degree angles, but that's not that apparent everywhere, right? There's more ease and support if we tune into it. Nature's really intent is just cycles of decay and renewal. So tuning into the renewal that comes every spring, we feel worthy of receiving and growing and renewing. And then the decay is letting things that no longer serve us kind of erode away, and then act to support what's the good things coming our way. There's no deadlines for doing this and that in man's world. Things unfold naturally, right? what we see too is though men become fearful of nature, and by men I mean men and women. It seems on an unconscious level more that there's a fear of the power of nature and that it is not really controllable by man. They try to control it. They'll bulldoze things. They'll spray deadly chemicals to kill things that they don't like. They'll try to genetically modify things for convenience, and I mean, there's other reasons given, but the ones that aren't usually given are kind of a dominance over nature, that they can control it, thinking that they understand nature more than nature understands itself and that they can conquer it. I will say, though, that, nature will work with us, too. It will allow us to have our own little section where it is not completely dominating. In my experience, like you can have a garden, you can do things on your property with nature to act in a little bit of control and say, okay, this is my space carved out, everything around that. People have their space, but then leaving nature to, in its intelligence and wisdom, to do what it does. Another thing we can notice is noticing itself in nature, observation. So we can zoom way out and look at kind of a whole ecosystem and how that might support practice. This goes into the conditions. Like today might be a little bit chillier. I've got my coat off now and hat, but I wore that when I was meditating. We don't want to do things when it's the temperature is not there, or there's maybe something going on around where it's going to be too distracting or triggering. So kind of observing our environment, but then we can zoom into the microcosmic level too and notice, just like right in front of me I have, dead leaves, right? And I'm going to pick one of these pieces of plants right here because there's so many on the ground you can't see. More our awareness and concentration improves, we can just look at the small details of everything around us. Like this green plant here, it has kind of like a fuzzy, surface, and it's speckled with purple splotches. It's got jagged edges, and the veins will divert in all kinds of interesting ways, like, antlers. There's like even a heart shape in this. It's got purple edges around the jagged thing too. Depending on our sphere of awareness, I guess, and ability for discernment and concentration, there's really no end to the kind of observations that can go on in nature, right? The variety, the changes, all the different elements that go into the forms too. And this goes with an attention span. Some people just won't see the fascination and curiosity in looking at something really deeply for a long time. And that's okay. It can take practice as well. And it's okay if it's just not interested in that. There's all kinds of benefits to being out in nature. And it doesn't have to be like a wilderness area like this. I don't know if anybody saw my Beth Upton interview. The beginning of that, I just did an intro from Francis Park, just a regular park. I would meditate next to a tree there a lot of times, several different trees. Bring a meditation cushion and a blanket. At first, it's when people see us, there's all kinds of maybe projections. Maybe they're thinking, oh, that person wants attention, or what are they doing? Oh, it's such a beautiful day. Why are they sitting there with their eyes closed? Where are their friends? All these different things. And those are all none of my business, really. What other people think about me is none of my business. That was really helpful for me. So that's some of the observations we can do. Now, we can look at communication in nature, too. Like the birds. It's really interesting to consider how birds do call and response, right? And some of their, the bird song. To me, sometimes I interpret certain bird songs as like a cluster of different possible words that are being said, right? Nothing really exact, but it's interesting to see our interpretation of that. We've heard these stories how the mycelium in the ground will communicate and how trees will communicate, do certain things with little trees compared to the bigger trees. Like mother trees will sometimes give out nutrients, and there's a communication network with the mycelium. I'm not really up on all the science of this, but I think there's a documentary, Fantastic Fungi, that goes into some of this. As far as the meditative stuff, true joy can really be found, for me at least, a lot easier when I'm not constantly having to deal with what comes with living around people, especially people that are going through challenges, being constantly distracted by media, obligations, things like this. And so we can get a truer solitude, or just even if it's just for a little bit, in nature too. Okay, so now back to some of the practice conditions. One of the really challenging things I did, especially during kind of more the warmer months, is bugs. So meditating out in nature with bugs, at first it kind of, it's obvious and natural that it kind of freaks you out if there's a bug lands on you, right? Over time though, well, first there's this book that really changed my perspective. I think it's Anastasia. It's this, it's actually a series of books. I think it's this Russian author, but I think it's even in the first book. I've only done the first 2 books. There's a big series about this gal who pretty much had lived her entire life out in the woods with very little interaction. If it's just made up or if it's based on a true story, I forget. She was talking one time about how bugs will tend to go to a place in the body where that it needs special attention. And so it's almost like this micro, it sounds wild, I know, micro acupuncture or acupressure. Sometimes I will just let them crawl, depending on what the bug is, right? We'll let it crawl in that spot. The subtle, peripheral nervous system will light up for me around that area in ways and sensations that I couldn't really get that I know of any other way. So it's a really kind of weird feeling at first, but it's also, if can change kind of the perspective and look at the kind of benefits something like as weird as that would have, then it changes the whole thing, for me anyway. Now, spiders, those are a little bit more, usually if you don't harm them, they're not going to harm you. And there's only 2 kinds of poisonous spiders around my area. And so sometimes I will let spiders crawl on me. Sometimes I will just blow them off. Of course, mosquitoes are a little bit more, that doesn't really apply to mosquitoes. So I did recently buy a mosquito net, so I'm going to probably be doing that in more the summertime, especially in some of the spots that I meditate in that are more challenging with things like that. If it's just a few bugs, it's not that big a deal. But the biggest thing is around bugs, though, for me, is loving kindness. And I really noticed a really big difference in this, is paying attention to the mind state. And then if there are, more than one just random bug, if you're getting more of them, then I start doing loving kindness practice. And the more authentic it can be, the better. So wishing them well. I know it sounds a little silly for some people. It's totally okay. But actually practicing loving kindness for the bugs. It seems like after a while, more times than not, it's wild how they respond and will just kind of go off the skin, maybe on the clothes, and then down to the ground. And if we're sitting near, we're kind of sitting in some of these bugs' homes sometimes if we're out meditating in nature. So some of them get curious and start crawling around. Other people will not have this happen. I mean, it's a big, rare deal if any kind of bug gets near them. And that's really cool. I say, that's all the greater. Let me know how you do it, or if there's anything like that. Some people won't even get bit by mosquitoes. I was talking to somebody the other day where it's the mosquitoes don't like them. Okay, so that's plenty on bugs. The other thing is, I just have a blanket here and a meditation cushion. Sometimes I'll go without any of that, and if it's dry, depending on how long I sit, it's not that big a deal to not have that with me either. But you want to remove, obviously, the things on the ground, so sticks that will jut into the leg. Maybe there's rocks and leaves. Obviously, the ground you want to be as level as possible, and experiment with what leg goes down first. So if there's incline or decline, left or right, then you kind of want to put which leg down first that would give the knee the best support compared to the others, to kind of play with kind of leveling out. If you're on a slight slope that goes forward, so that can act as a natural meditation cushion, so where the rear is up a little bit and the knees are down. So if you look for that spot. Finding a tree is interesting. And meditating by a tree, it's a kind of a classic thing. I won't go into that now because I don't really feel prepared to talk about the essence and nature of trees and how they relate to meditation practice, because it can get a little kind of metaphysical there. Yes, it's obvious things like if it's a sunny day, then you might want to find some shade. If it's a cooler day, you might want to sit in the sunshine a little longer. Actually, I'm by a tree now that looks more of a hollowed out tree, so you might want to look for that. So it's probably not a good idea because there could be some critters living in there. They don't scare me too much anymore. Obviously, look at bigger trees. If they look a little bit dead, then you probably don't want to be next to them in case the rare chance that a branch might fall out. Of course, you look at weather conditions, things like that. And so now this other thing, because nature can be so healing, at least for me, kind of rebalancing the nervous system, exchanging of negative ions, those are the good ones, and kind of restoring and balancing. I can easily become dependent on nature, ironically enough. If I'm running out to nature to just kind of heal and solve everything all the time, sometimes I question that. It's like, well, I have to be able to, if I don't have that option, I have to be okay with other ways of doing this too, of healing. Sometimes it's just staying in bed instead of running off to nature all the time. I don't know if anybody's in that situation. It really makes such a huge difference for me, especially when earthing, can get bare feet on the ground. It's a great way for me to find center and balance a lot easier and kind of restore to a natural state, how I feel I'm meant to live. Even if you're not doing a formal practice in meditation, just being outside, even just walking outside. So usually I don't even go with any technology anymore into nature a lot of times, unless I have to get a hold of somebody or I'm going someplace new that's really off the grid, or I want to take pictures of something. So sometimes I miss out on the picture things. But when I first started this, I kind of had like a withdrawal, right? Like I just felt like I was naked almost without my cell phone, walking outside even just for a little bit. Eventually I would just go on a short walk without it, started to attune to how it felt without a cell phone. Now it's almost, like I said, a rarity when I will take a cell phone out in nature now, depending on certain circumstances. And just pay attention to kind of what the emotional reaction is with that, if there's any kind of fear and anxiety for not having your cell phone with you. And then also notice the benefits of like how freeing it is to kind of cut the cord, even just for, a short walk outside. Yeah, kind of pay attention to the nervous system and the benefits it can have without any kind of technology on you. It's one suggestion anyway. I've noticed big benefits too. And then one of the big things is if you don't have to have your cell phone on at night, completely, at least put it in a different room. I mean, if you need to hear somebody call you, you can still hear it outside the room. I turn all my electronics off completely at night because I'm in the spot where I don't have to. I'm not a caretaker for anybody in particular. Yes, if there's some kind of emergency during the night, a couple hours I'll know about it. But I wanted to kind of close with this verse from the Dhammapada. It's 378. It's really short. Or actually, no, there's three verses here. Very short verses. 99, 205, and 378 about forest and whatnot. So this is verse 99 of the Dhammapada. Delightful are forest where the public does not delight. There the passion-free delight, not seeking sensual pleasure. This is 205. Tasting the flavor of solitude and peace, one becomes free of distress and evil, drinking the flavor of Dharma joy. And this is 378. peaceful in body, peaceful in speech. The practitioner, peaceful and well concentrated, who has rejected the world's bait, is called one at peace. All right, guys, thanks for joining me virtually here near the Missouri River here in St. Charles. And I wish you all an optimal, ideal infusion and expression of energy and consciousness.